Welcome back, Patriots, to another episode of the Balt Brad Show, where we're discussing the complexities of Donald Trump's lawsuit and why I believe, even though these leftist prosecutors and judge may have won the battle, Donald Trump on appeal may just, in fact, win the war. You have this nut job judge who presided over a civil business fraud trial against Donald Trump on Friday, ordered the former president, his sons, his business associates, and company to pay more than $350 million in damages, and temporarily limited their ability to do business in New York. Now, if you're somebody that is a real estate developer in New York and you saw this lawsuit as well as the outcome, you better stop doing business in New York because you're next. And somebody that talks a lot about these business practices and who has been in real estate development for decades is Mr. Wonderful Kevin O'Leary, who was on CNN just a month ago talking about how real estate developers offset their assets against basically a construction loan, and how you almost want to overstate that asset or get close to as much valuation of that asset as you can so that you can get as much of a construction loan as possible. He does a fabulous job here of explaining this. Let's roll it.
I have to ask you, look, some people look at all this and they say, is this what happens in business, what Trump has said he's done or is accused of being done? You've been doing real estate for decades. Does this case strike you as odd?
Well, let's leave out Trump for a minute and let's leave out politics and just talk about what happens in real estate development anywhere. So if you're a developer and you've got a building on a block anywhere in America and it's worth, let's say, $500 million, and you want to build a building right beside it, you go to the bank and say, this building is worth $500 million. I'd like to borrow a construction finance loan against this asset, and I want you to tell me it's worth $500 million too. And the bank negotiates with you and says, well, no, we think it's worth $400 million. And you fight it out. You're always trying to show your assets in the brightest light with the sunshine you could possibly determine for them. You want them to be worth the very most because you're only going to get a 40 or 50% loan to value, as it's called. Then you borrow that money. In the case of a $500 million asset, maybe you get $250 million, and you build a new building with a construction finance loan. And so that's what this case is all about. And by the way, forget about Trump. Every single real estate developer everywhere on earth does this. They always talk about their asset being worth a lot, and the bank says no. And that's just the way it is. So in this case, when I'm trying to figure out, and I'm not pro or con, or I don't care about the politics, who lost money? Nobody. The bank got paid back the construction finance loan, and a new building was built. And
that's also why I find it interesting that the judge hit them with damages, and those damages are at, $350 million. Donald Trump's sons are having to pay $4 million each or something like that. They're barred from doing business. Now, not everything Kevin here is saying, I think, displays what actually Donald Trump did as well as his business associates. And that's something we'll break down. Again, this is about the complexities of the lawsuit, but we'll let him continue.
If you're going to sue this case and win, you got to sue every real estate developer everywhere. This is
Correct.
all they do. This is what they do all day long, every day. So I don't think this thing will ever survive appeal, regardless of what the fine is. This doesn't even make sense. Now, look, I know Trump's got a lot of problems in other indictments and everything else, but this, if you're a real estate developer, you're watching this, you're saying, what is this? This is ridiculous.
Well, the thing is, most people who are in this world are not real estate developers, and they necessarily don't know that this is the way maybe things are done, even if it might be violative of the law. But the question about who loses money, and I've heard this argument, and he's raised this argument.
Credit to CNN here. She did a great job of actually saying that correctly, that even though this is a normal business practice, it is something that is technically, one, unethical, it is immoral, and it is, in fact, against the law. But we'll come back to that in just one moment towards the end of this episode.
Argument. Others have raised this argument that who's the real victim here? How about the fact that you can get a tax benefit for having overvalued or having a different value that's actually normal, doesn't that deprive the state of revenue? Is that enough, do you think?
Notice she said revenue there, and there is some truth to that. But the question is that does Trump have operating losses, or does he have losses that are carried over? And if he does, would that actually, in fact, affect New York in terms of revenue of what she's saying here? So like I mentioned, I know I'm repeating myself, this is actually very complex and something that I think a lot of Americans don't understand, and rightfully so, because they're not in the business of performing audits, not in the position or in the business of conducting valuation of whatever these assets are supposed to be. And if they're overvalued or undervalued, and if the bank actually accepts that valuation, is that considered fraud still? As I mentioned, we'll break all this down in just one moment.
I know you're laughing,
You better
but
get
this
ready
is
to
rich people problems are very different than my world. Go ahead.
I mean, I get it. I totally get it. And you're making a valid point. But it's humorous in the sense that you have to sue every single real estate developer
Correct.
Here in Miami, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in Detroit, in Dallas. This is what they do every day. This is what the real estate game is all about. It's getting construction financing against stabilized assets. When a building is fully leased out and everybody's renting it and you've got offices or you've got apartments in it, it's called a stable asset. And you value it and you go to the bank and say, this asset is worth $500 million. And I want to borrow $250 million against it. And the bank always negotiates with you. Everybody understands how this works. And that's why I think it's going to be very, very hard to make this stick in reality later. This is not, of all the things that Trump's being accused of and being litigated for and indicted for, this is not his problem. This is not his problem. He's got much worse problems than this. This is, for real estate developers, this is a joke.
I couldn't agree with Kevin anymore and even add any more commentary to what he said. Now, to be fair, just because something is a normal business practice doesn't mean that it's still, acceptable or that it's legal. So in this scenario here, as I've mentioned, and I'm going to try to just keep this simple because this is way more complex than I can ever describe. And I'm not a lawyer, although as a public accountant, if you're overstating your assets, that is illegal. You can't do that. And folks, look, Donald Trump did technically overstate his assets. And what Kevin O'Leary was describing there was everybody tries to get the most out of their asset they can. But what he didn't mention was overstatement of assets. So if you have a property that's legitimately valued at 200 million, you can't overstate that at 250 or 300 million. But you're still going to try to get the most out of that 200 million that you possibly can because it's legitimate. Now, Trump did go over that, but a lot of people, folks, do overvalue their assets in real estate development. And generally, if you're going for this, basically this construction loan that Kevin O'Leary is describing, as well as what took place basically in this Trump lawsuit, is that these banks will generally have an accountant, an auditor come out and actually perform an audit on that to see what the appraisal is. The title search will take place, a financial review, there'll be a legal review, meaning these audits are in depth. And the bank basically wants to see, hey, is what you're portraying here on your side equivalent to what we're portraying on this side? And as Kevin mentioned, if there is a discrepancy, which there very well might be, the bank is up to their discretion on, do we want to inherit this risk? And will the people that were basically utilizing their savings to offer this loan, will we be able to get our money back at the end of the day? Again, I'm being extremely simplified here in terms of my explanation. The bank was willing to do it. The loan was paid back. And to kind of mention this idea of the tax revenue for the state, please understand, folks, when you have this building that is built on behalf of the Trump company, is that if these are being rented out, the revenue from that building over the course of its life is going to far exceed the revenue that they would have had just from the overstatement of their asset. So Kevin O'Leary is correct in that this is a wild lawsuit, and it has always been a wild lawsuit, which is why I did a thumbnail of that judge in a clown makeup, because it's a clown show of a trial. And as I've mentioned, just because everybody does it doesn't make it legal. And Trump very well could still lose the appeal. But I think in the broader scheme of things, because so many people do this, and it is a negotiation at the end of the day between the bank as well as the Trump company, that I think this is just going to fall apart. Now, just because the bank did agree regarding the loan at the end of the day and the valuation, let's say, of the asset, there still could be bank fraud that's there. And this is when you get more into, well, did the individuals from the Trump team knowingly overestimate their asset? And that's where Donald Trump's signature kind of got him in trouble. And that's why they brought in, oh God, who was his name? Was it Cohen? I think it was Cohen. And then they brought in the CEO. And Cohen was basically saying, hey, this overvaluation wasn't necessarily told by Trump to do, but he used the idea of like a mob boss in the trial, and that it's kind of like, well, what the mob boss says, even though he doesn't explicitly tell you to, you got to read between the lines and just do it. But then you had the CEO come out and basically evade questioning regarding this overstatement of assets, kind of saying, hey, I just don't remember all the nuances and the nitty gritty of what you're asking me. So I think because this is so complex, I think because this is, in a nutshell, something that happens very often throughout the country in real estate development, whether you like it or not, whether it's illegal or not, everybody's doing it. Then by prosecuting Trump here, having him pay this fine, and ultimately him losing on appeal, opens the floodgates for every real estate developer to be sued. And if that's something we want to come to terms with as a society and allow to happen, then hey, so be it. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think our court systems are already swamped. I don't think we have the infrastructure for it. And at the end of the day, I think this is going to fall on appeal. But as I mentioned, technically Trump did break the law. A lot of real estate developers do. I think this is a witch hunt in the sense of they're just trying to damage Trump as much as they possibly can. And by the way, that also comes across in this article here. I mean, it very much comes across in this article that the purpose of what they're doing is just trying to damage the Trump company, Trump himself, his sons, his business associates. And that's basically what I got out of this NBC article within itself, that it wasn't necessarily trying to put Trump behind bars. It wasn't even, in fact, necessarily trying to even win wholeheartedly the case or make a statement for other real estate developers. It was just to damage the Trump family. I think that's kind of gross. And I think it builds a legal system that ultimately is, no longer having the blindfold, that they're just going after a man for anything and possibly everything they can because they don't want him to be president, because they just don't like the guy. They don't like what he says. They don't like what he does. And I think that's a pretty disgusting practice that we've allowed to happen, mostly from the progressive left here, the out branch of the outgrowth of the Democrat Party. And so I don't think this is going to happen in terms of appeal. I think Trump is going to win the war at the end of the day. And by the way, that war is won on behalf of a lot of Americans. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Do you think Donald Trump, one, broke the law? And two, do you think he's going to win on appeal? I think he broke the law. I think he's going to win on appeal because a lot of people do this. And, if the bank agreed with it, hey, the bank agreed with it. They got paid back. And by the way, New York City was going to make a lot of revenue off this bad boy. With that being said, folks, I'll see you later here on The Ball Brad Show.